My name is Gemma, 33 years old, and my grandfather left me his entire estate, worth $4,600,000. The parents who cut me off at 18 showed up to the will reading grinning. They told the lawyer they would manage the money for me. But when the attorney read the final page of the document, their arrogant smiles shattered into a million pieces. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. The mahogany-paneled conference room felt suffocatingly small. I sat perfectly still in my navy suit, maintaining the professional posture I had perfected running my own landscape architecture firm. Across the table sat my mother, Brenda, wearing an oversized diamond necklace bought on high-interest credit. Beside her sat my father, Harrison, adjusting the cuffs of a custom suit he could not afford. My 35-year-old brother, Gavin, lounged in his chair with a smug, entitled grin plastered across his face. They completely ignored my presence, whispering excitedly about spending Grandfather Winston's money. They fully expected his entire financial empire to be handed to them on a silver platter. Mr. Bennett, the estate attorney, entered the room and opened a thick leather folder. My parents leaned forward, their eyes gleaming with unrestrained greed. Mr. Bennett stated that the entirety of Winston's assets totaled exactly $4,600,000. A gasp of delight escaped my mother's lips. But then Mr. Bennett announced that every single penny, property, and asset was left solely and exclusively to me, Gemma. The silence in the room was absolute. Then my mother let out a shrill, nervous laugh, waving her manicured hand dismissively. She stated there must be a clerical error. My father chimed in, claiming Winston was confused and heavily medicated in his final days. My mother immediately pivoted to her favorite psychological weapon, gaslighting me in front of professionals. She told the attorney that I was simply too fragile, emotionally unstable, and incompetent to handle massive financial responsibility. She smiled right at me and said, "Do not worry, Gemma. Your father and I will set up a management account immediately. We will take full control of the assets for you." I remained dead silent. Mr. Bennett held up his hand, firmly silencing my mother's manipulative scheming. He stated Winston was of perfectly sound mind, backed by 3 independent psychological evaluations conducted just days before he passed. Then Mr. Bennett dropped the ultimate trap card my grandfather had brilliantly engineered. The entire estate was locked securely in a blind trust under my name. The clause explicitly stated that if any family member attempted to contest the will, sue for a share, or challenge my mental competency in court, the trust would automatically deploy funds to hire a forensic accounting firm. This elite firm would audit Brenda Harrison and Gavin's finances for the past 10 consecutive years, turning all findings directly over to the Internal Revenue Service and federal prosecutors. The color drained from my father's face so fast, he looked like he might physically pass out. My mother's condescending smile vanished. They were paralyzed by genuine, absolute fear. My grandfather knew they were living far beyond their actual means, masking a massive mountain of debt and shady financial dealings behind a fake country club facade. By threatening them with a mandatory tax audit, Winston had built an impenetrable legal fortress around my inheritance. Suddenly, the quiet fear in the room shattered. Gavin slammed his fists onto the mahogany table, his face turning an ugly shade of purple. He pointed a shaking finger directly at my chest, screaming that I was a manipulative thief. He shouted that I had intentionally isolated a dying old man, feeding him lies to steal the money that rightfully belonged to him, the true heir. His violent outburst transported me back 15 years to the coldest night of my life. I was 18, working double shifts at a local diner to pay for my upcoming college tuition. I came home one evening to find my joint student savings account completely drained. My parents coldly admitted they had transferred my entire $20,000 fund to pay off Gavin's massive illegal sports betting debts. When I cried hysterically and demanded my hard-earned money back, my father grabbed me roughly by the arm and dragged me to the front door. He called me an ungrateful, selfish child who did not understand family loyalty. He threw me out onto the freezing Chicago streets in the middle of a winter storm with nothing but a black plastic trash bag filled with clothes. My mother stood on the porch looking down at me with absolute disgust and told me I was dead to them. I had survived that cruel betrayal. I took out student loans, hauled bags of dirt, planted trees in the pouring rain, and studied soil compositions late into the night. Over a decade of relentless grinding, I built my own landscape architecture studio from scratch. I looked calmly at my brother, taking in his rumpled silk shirt and his pathetic lack of emotional control. I told him that the only reason he was angry was because he knew he could not survive a single week without using our parents as a personal bank. I turned to my parents, stared them dead in the eye, and told them that actions have permanent consequences. Without another word, I turned my back on them and walked out of the conference room. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor, my heart pounding with profound relief. But just as I stepped into the parking garage, my phone blared with an urgent notification from my studio's security system. Someone was actively smashing through my heavy glass front doors with a massive metal crowbar. I stared at the security feed on my screen in horror. The figure swinging the crowbar stepped through the shattered remains of my studio doors, pulling back his hood. It was Gavin. He must have sped out of the parking garage and driven straight to my headquarters. I threw my truck into gear, ignoring the green light ahead, and slammed on the gas pedal. The heavy rain lashed against my windshield as I navigated the streets, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was not the terrified 18-year-old he remembered. I was the owner of this business, and I was going to protect it. I pulled into the studio parking lot. The glass doors I had paid $10,000 to install were completely obliterated. Shards of thick glass littered the concrete floor of the reception area. I stepped out of my truck, the cold rain soaking my navy suit, and marched toward the entrance. The sounds of destruction echoed from inside. Gavin was inside my main drafting room, wielding the crowbar like a madman. I stood in the doorway, watching him destroy years of my hard work. He had already smashed 2 of my drafting tables and was currently taking out his rage on a row of Japanese maples waiting to be installed for a client. Gavin reeked of cheap alcohol, his expensive silk shirt torn and covered in dirt and sap. He spun around when he heard my footsteps crunching on the broken glass. His face was twisted into a snarl. He pointed the crowbar at me, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. He demanded I transfer $500,000 to his bank account immediately. He screamed that he was in the middle of a financial crisis and that I owed him that money to fix it. He threatened to smash every computer and server in the building if I did not pull out my phone and initiate the wire transfer right that second. He thought his violence would paralyze me. He thought I would cower and submit, just like my parents always did when he threw his temper tantrums. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not utter a single word of defense. I looked at him with control. I took one step backward, moving out of the vestibule and back onto the wet pavement. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened my security application, and pressed the master lockdown button. Steel security shutters instantly deployed from the ceiling, slamming down over the entrance and all the ground floor windows. Gavin lunged toward the door, but he was too late. The steel barricade locked into place, trapping him inside the wrecked drafting room. I stood in the rain, dialing the police. I informed the dispatcher that an intoxicated, violent intruder was trapped inside my property after causing thousands of dollars in damage. The police arrived less than 5 minutes later. They bypassed me, forcing the security shutters up just enough to enter, with weapons drawn. Gavin tried to pull rank. He screamed at the arresting officers, demanding they call our father, insisting this was just a family dispute over an inheritance. The officers were unimpressed. They slammed him against the wall, slapped handcuffs on his wrists, and read him his rights. I stood silently under the awning as they hauled my brother into the back of a squad car. The lead officer took my statement. I provided them with the security footage directly from my phone and officially filed for a restraining order against Gavin. The damage to my studio was extensive, but my insurance would cover every penny. What mattered was that Gavin had just handed me the ultimate leverage. I followed the squad car to the downtown police precinct to finalize the charges and sign the paperwork. The precinct lobby was bright, sterile, and smelled of cheap coffee and floor wax. I sat on a chair finalizing the documents on a clipboard when the doors swung open. Naomi walked in. She was Gavin's wife, my sister-in-law. This was the very first time I had seen her in 15 years. Naomi was a corporate consultant, and she looked the part. She wore a business suit, carrying a leather briefcase. She did not look frantic or worried. She looked glacial. She approached the front desk to sign the bail paperwork. She did not look at Gavin with the love my parents always showed him. She looked at him through the reinforced glass of the holding cell with disgust. After finishing at the desk, Naomi turned and walked toward the corner where I was sitting. I braced myself for an attack, expecting her to hurl the same accusations my parents used. Instead, Naomi stopped 2 feet away from me. Her expression remained unreadable, projecting a poker face. She leaned down, bringing her face closer to mine. She did not raise her voice. She whispered a question that made my blood run cold. She asked me if Winston's final will mentioned anything about a $200,000 personal loan he had given Gavin last year. I stared at her, shocked by the question. Before I could process what she was implying, Naomi stood up straight, smoothed the lapels of her suit, and walked away without uttering another word. I watched her leave the precinct with Gavin. Naomi had just deliberately dropped a vital breadcrumb right into my lap. She knew something my parents were trying to hide. I walked out to my truck, my mind racing with possibilities. My phone buzzed with a text from my studio manager. Brenda had just launched a social media smear campaign, posting fabricated videos falsely claiming I suffered from severe paranoia and delusions. Upon pulling into my dark driveway exactly an hour later, a process server stepped out of the shadows, handing me legal documents. My parents were suing me for full medical guardianship over the estate. I stood perfectly still in my dark driveway, the cold rain soaking into the shoulders of my tailored navy suit. The taillights of the process server's rusted sedan vanished down the street, leaving me entirely alone with a thick stack of legal documents in my hands. The top page featured the seal of the county family court. The bold black letters spelled out a petition for full medical guardianship and conservatorship. Brenda and Harrison were officially suing to strip me of my basic human rights, my thriving business, and my $4,600,000 inheritance. I walked inside my house, locked the heavy deadbolt, and threw the damp documents onto my kitchen island. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the legal jargon, until I reached the core of their attack. They had attached a sworn medical affidavit from a man named Dr. Carlson. Dr. Carlson was an old family friend and a licensed psychiatrist who frequently attended my parents' lavish country club dinners. He had signed a legal document claiming that my 15-year estrangement from my family was a clear symptom of severe paranoia, mental deterioration, and gross financial incompetence. The sheer audacity of the trap was breathtaking. My parents knew they could not legally contest my grandfather's blind trust without triggering the mandatory tax audit that would send them to federal prison. So they found a devious, terrifying loophole. If they could convince a judge that I was mentally unfit to care for myself, the court would appoint them as my legal guardians. They would automatically gain total control over the estate, and the trust's audit clause would never be triggered because they were acting as my official caretakers, rather than contesting the will. I did not panic. I poured myself a glass of cold water, sat at my kitchen island, and read every single page of the petition. They wanted a war, and I was going to give them one. Early the next morning, I sat in the sleek, glass-walled war room of my own high-powered corporate attorney. His name was Jonathan, and he was the sharpest litigator in Chicago. Jonathan spread the conservatorship documents across the polished table, his expression grim. He explained the terrifying reality of the American legal system. A signed medical affidavit from a licensed psychiatrist gave a judge immediate grounds to freeze my bank accounts, temporarily seize my landscape architecture studio, and hand total control of my daily life over to my parents, pending a psychological evaluation. Jonathan told me they were rushing the emergency hearing to catch me off guard. He warned me that if we lost Brenda, and Harrison would have the legal authority to lock me in a psychiatric facility and drain my grandfather's estate dry. I looked Jonathan dead in the eye and told him I refused to be intimidated. I instructed him to immediately hire a private investigator to dig into Dr. Carlson's finances and medical license. I knew my parents were drowning in secret debt, which meant they had likely bribed the doctor to sign the fraudulent affidavit. Jonathan smiled, recognizing my absolute determination, and began drafting our brutal legal counteroffensive. Later that afternoon, I arrived at a sprawling, multi-million-dollar estate in the affluent northern suburbs. My crew was in the middle of installing a massive, intricate terraced garden for a highly influential client named Mrs. Kensington. The site was loud with the roar of heavy machinery, the grinding of excavators moving earth, and the shouts of my contractors coordinating the delivery of massive limestone boulders. I wore my hard hat, steel-toed boots, and high-visibility vest, directing the chaotic operation with absolute precision. I was standing near the terrace reviewing blueprints with Mrs. Kensington when I saw a luxury car pull up to the edge of the property. My father Harrison stepped out. He wore a pristine gray suit, looking completely out of place on an active construction site. He spotted me and marched directly across the muddy lawn, ignoring the warning signs and yellow caution tape. He approached me right in front of my wealthiest client. He put on a sickeningly sweet, theatrical performance, playing the role of a heartbroken, loving father, desperately trying to save his troubled daughter. He spoke loudly, ensuring Mrs. Kensington could hear every single word. He told me that he and my mother could forgive me for stealing the family inheritance. He begged me to just sign the medical proxy documents and come home so they could get me the psychiatric help I so desperately needed. He wanted to humiliate me. He wanted to destroy my professional credibility and force me to submit through public shame. 15 years ago, I would have crumbled under his psychological warfare. Today, I used my absolute professional authority to crush him. I did not defend my sanity. I did not engage with his lies. I looked at his expensive suit, raised my voice over the roar of the excavators, and pointed directly at his feet. I stated firmly that he was trespassing on a restricted active construction zone without a hard hat or steel-toed boots. I informed him that his presence was a direct violation of federal safety regulations and an extreme liability to my company. I pulled my radio and ordered my site security team to immediately escort the unauthorized civilian off the premises before he injured himself. My father's face contorted in shock and fury. Security guards flanked him within seconds, physically guiding him away from the terrace and back toward the street. Mrs. Kensington watched the entire exchange, thoroughly impressed by my ruthless efficiency and unshakable professionalism. I had completely neutralized his attack. But the war was far from over. I checked the security camera and froze. Gavin's wife, Naomi, was standing on my porch holding a thick leather briefcase. That night, a sharp knock on my front door broke the silence of my home. I checked the security camera and froze. Gavin's wife, Naomi, was standing on my porch holding a thick leather briefcase. I slowly opened my heavy oak door, keeping the security chain engaged. Naomi stood in the pouring rain. We had not spoken in 15 years. She did not offer a polite greeting or a warm smile. She looked at me with a chilling intensity and stated that Gavin had completely lost his mind. She told me he was currently driving to my landscape design studio with a crowbar, desperate to extort $500,000 to fix a catastrophic financial crisis he had caused. Just as the words left her mouth, my phone erupted with a blaring, high-pitched security alarm. The screen flashed a bright red notification showing motion detected at my headquarters. I dropped the chain, told Naomi to wait inside, and sprinted to my truck. I immediately threw my heavy-duty truck into gear, my tires spinning on the wet asphalt as I sped through the dark suburban streets. My mind raced, but I refused to let panic take control. I had built my landscape architecture firm from absolutely nothing, pouring my sweat, blood, and tears into making this business a massive success over the last 10 grueling, incredibly lonely years. It was my sanctuary, my life's work, and I was not going to let my spoiled, entitled brother tear it apart. I finally pulled into my studio's parking lot, and the sight made my blood boil. The custom tempered glass double doors I had paid $10,000 to install were completely shattered. Shards of thick glass glittered like ice across the wet concrete. Gavin's leased white BMW was parked diagonally across 2 handicap spaces, the driver's side door left wide open. I stepped out of my truck, the cold rain soaking my clothes, and crunched over the broken glass into my main drafting room. The destruction was systematic and brutal. Gavin was standing in the center of the room, wielding a heavy iron crowbar. He reeked of cheap whiskey and profound desperation. He had already smashed my custom oak drafting tables, sending expensive monitors and blueprints crashing to the floor. But what truly angered me was the severe damage to my plants. I had recently imported a dozen rare century-old Japanese maples for a high-profile client. Gavin was violently swinging the crowbar into their delicate, meticulously pruned branches, snapping the ancient wood in half, and kicking the expensive ceramic pots until rich soil spilled across the floor. He spun around when he heard my boots crunching on the glass. His face flushed dark red, his expensive silk shirt torn and stained with dirt. He pointed the iron bar directly at my chest, his shoulders heaving as he gasped for air. He screamed that I owed him. He demanded I pull out my phone and wire transfer $500,000 to his bank account right that second. He shouted that he was in a massive crisis, going to lose everything, and it was my absolute duty to bail him out. He threatened to smash every remaining computer, every window, and every rare plant in the building if I did not submit. He expected me to cry. He expected me to cower and beg just like my parents always did when he threw one of his violent tantrums. He thought he could bully me into total submission. I did not scream back. I did not shed a single tear. I looked at him with absolute freezing control. I did not say a word to him. I took one deliberate step backward, moving out of the drafting room into the secure concrete vestibule. I pulled my phone from my pocket, opened my advanced security application, and pressed the master lockdown panic button. Instantly, heavy steel security shutters dropped from the ceiling with a loud mechanical grinding noise. They slammed down over the front entrance and all the ground floor windows. Gavin lunged toward the vestibule, realizing what I was doing, but he was too slow. The steel barricade locked into place with a heavy clank, trapping him inside the wrecked drafting room. I stood safely on the outside in the cold rain, dialing 911. I calmly informed the dispatcher that an intoxicated, violent intruder had broken into my property, caused thousands in damage, and was currently locked inside. The police arrived less than 4 minutes later, sirens wailing and blue lights flashing through the rain. They bypassed me, coordinating their entry. I used my phone to raise the front security shutter, just enough for 4 armed officers to enter. Gavin immediately dropped the crowbar, but he did not surrender quietly. He tried to pull rank. He screamed at the officers, demanding they call our father, insisting this was simply a private family dispute over an inheritance, and that I was the one who stole money from him. The police officers were completely unimpressed by his entitled whining. They slammed him roughly against the brick wall and kicked his legs apart and slapped metal handcuffs onto his wrists. As they loudly read him his Miranda rights, Gavin's rage suddenly broke. The reality of his situation finally hit him, and he began to sob uncontrollably. He cried like a pathetic child, begging me to tell the police it was a misunderstanding, pleading with me to drop the charges so his life would not be ruined. I stood silently under the awning, watching with total detachment as they hauled my weeping brother into the back of a squad car. The lead officer approached to take my official statement. I handed him a digital copy of the security footage and immediately filed the paperwork for a strict, permanent restraining order against my brother. I was absolutely done playing their toxic family games. This event was only the beginning of my ultimate calculated revenge. I followed the squad car straight to the downtown police precinct. The storm outside was nothing compared to the storm I was preparing to unleash. I parked in the visitor lot and walked inside. The lobby was painfully bright. The air smelled of stale coffee. I sat on a hard plastic chair in the corner, waiting for the desk sergeant to print out my official restraining order documents. I kept my posture straight and my expression completely neutral. I felt absolutely no remorse today. He had made his bed, and now he was going to sleep in it. I was ready to face whatever consequence came my way. I heard the heavy double doors swing open behind me. The sharp, authoritative click of expensive heels echoed across the linoleum floor. I turned my head and saw Naomi walk into the lobby. Naomi was Gavin's wife, a 34-year-old African-American woman who worked as an elite mergers and acquisitions consultant. We had not seen each other in over 15 years because my parents had actively worked to keep me isolated from anyone connected to their pristine social circle. Naomi looked absolutely stunning and deeply intimidating. She wore a razor-sharp charcoal gray designer suit that screamed corporate power. Her hair was pulled back into a flawless, severe bun, and she carried a sleek leather briefcase. She did not look like a frantic, worried spouse rushing to save her husband. She looked like an executioner, arriving to sign a death warrant. I braced myself. I tightened my grip on the clipboard in my lap, fully expecting Naomi to march over and start screaming at me. I prepared myself for the usual toxic family script. I expected her to blame me for ruining Gavin's life, to call me a vindictive liar, and to demand that I drop the criminal charges. Instead, Naomi completely ignored my presence. She walked straight past my chair with purposeful, measured strides and approached the front desk. She pulled a gold pen from her briefcase and spoke to the desk sergeant in a calm, professional, and chillingly flat voice. She stated that she was there to process the bail paperwork for Gavin. Behind the thick, reinforced glass of the holding area, Gavin spotted his wife. He immediately rushed to the glass, pressing his hands against it. His silk shirt was still covered in the dirt and sap from my destroyed studio. He looked pathetic. He started whining loudly through the glass, playing the ultimate victim. He shouted that I had set him up, that he was just trying to talk to me, and that the police had treated him like a common criminal. He expected Naomi to rush to his side to coddle him and to validate his ridiculous delusions. Naomi slowly turned her head and looked at him through the glass. She did not offer a warm smile. She did not press her hand to the glass in a display of tragic romance. She looked at her husband with absolute freezing disgust. Her dark eyes narrowed, conveying a level of contempt so pure and intense that it actually made Gavin stop mid-sentence. He took a physical step back from the glass, realizing that his wife was not there to rescue him out of love. She was there to clean up a mess, and she clearly despised the mess he had become. Naomi turned her attention back to the desk sergeant. She effortlessly reviewed the thick stack of release forms, her eyes scanning the legal jargon with the speed of a seasoned corporate raider. She signed her name on multiple lines with quick, aggressive strokes of her gold pen. She handed over a corporate credit card to cover the bail amount, never once looking back at the holding cell. The entire process took less than 5 minutes. She handled the situation with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate liquidation. Once the sergeant handed her the final receipt, Naomi slid the paperwork into her briefcase and snapped it shut. The sharp click echoed in the quiet lobby. She turned away from the desk and began walking toward the exit. But instead of leaving, she abruptly changed her trajectory. She walked deliberately toward the corner where I was sitting. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I forced myself to maintain a blank, fearless expression. I refused to let her intimidate me. Naomi stopped exactly 2 feet away from my chair. She stood tall, projecting a commanding, icy presence. She did not raise her voice. She did not cause a scene. She casually looked down at me, leaning in just slightly so that only I could hear her words. Her expression remained completely unreadable, an absolute poker face perfected in high-stakes boardrooms. She asked me a single, highly specific question. She whispered, "Did Winston's final will mention absolutely anything about a $200,000 personal loan he gave Gavin last year?" The question hit me like a physical blow to the chest. My breath hitched, and I stared up at her in total shock. I had read my grandfather's will cover to cover. There was zero mention of a $200,000 loan. The trust held $4,600,000 in clean, verified assets. If Gavin had secretly taken $200,000 from my grandfather, it meant he had likely stolen it, or worse, forged documents to obtain it before Winston died. Naomi watched the realization crash over my face. She saw my shock and knew exactly what it meant. She had just confirmed a massive, dangerous financial secret that my parents were desperately trying to bury. Without waiting for my answer, Naomi stood up straight, smoothed the lapels of her charcoal suit, and turned around. She walked out of the police precinct, her heels clicking rhythmically against the floor, disappearing into the dark, rainy night. She left me sitting there with a massive trail of breadcrumbs, fundamentally shifting the entire war. I walked to my truck, my mind racing. A $200,000 loan, not on any official ledger, meant Gavin committed fraud and my parents were covering it up. I started the engine. As I pulled out of the parking lot, my phone vibrated violently. It was a relentless barrage of alerts. Text messages, missed calls, and social media tags flooded my screen. My stomach tightened. I pulled over onto a quiet side street and opened my primary social media application. My mother had launched a full-scale, highly coordinated public attack. Brenda had posted a 10-minute video across every major platform. She sat on her expensive beige sofa, wearing minimal makeup, projecting the image of a heartbroken mother. She forced tears to well up in her eyes, speaking with a trembling voice. She told her wealthy suburban followers that our family was experiencing a private, devastating tragedy. She claimed I was suffering from a severe mental decline. She stated with fake sincerity that my 15 years of independence were actually a prolonged manic episode fueled by dangerous delusions. Brenda took her lies to a criminal level. She wiped a fake tear and declared I had used my supposed mental instability to manipulate my dying, confused grandfather. She explicitly told her audience that Winston had suffered from severe dementia in his final months, a blatant, verifiable lie. She claimed I had isolated him, brainwashed him, and forced him to sign over his estate to me while he was unaware of his actions. She ended the video, begging for prayers to get her sick daughter psychiatric help. The comment section was a nightmare. Hundreds of people, from country club acquaintances to local business owners, left sympathetic messages. They praised Brenda for her maternal strength and condemned me as a greedy, unhinged monster. Within an hour, the digital poison seeped into my real life. My professional phone line began to ring. My elite landscape architecture clients were calling. My studio manager forwarded a terrified email from Mrs. Kensington, whose multi-million-dollar terrace garden we were actively installing. She expressed deep concern about the troubling news, asking to pause the project until my quote-unquote health issues were resolved. Other clients called to ask if their deposits were safe. My mother was actively trying to destroy the business I had spent a decade building, cut off my income, and force me into submission through sheer financial terror. A hot, violent wave of anger surged through my chest. My fingers hovered over the keyboard of my phone. I wanted to draft a massive public post exposing the truth. I wanted to upload the security footage of Gavin destroying my studio in a drunken rage. I wanted to tell the world about the $20,000 they stole from me when I was a teenager. The urge to fight back publicly to defend my sanity and my grandfather's legacy was nearly overpowering. But I stopped myself. I took a deep, shaky breath and closed my eyes, listening to the rain hit the roof. I remembered the cold, calculating look on Naomi's face. Responding to my mother's public hysteria would only give her the engagement and drama she craved. It would validate her narrative that I was reactive and unstable. More importantly, it would ruin my legal strategy. I drove straight home. Safely locked inside my house, I booted up my computer. I did not post a single word in my defense. I maintained absolute, terrifying silence online. Instead, I became a machine. I methodically downloaded my mother's video in high resolution. I took time-stamped screenshots of every single post, shared link, and defamatory comment from my parents and their friends. I saved the panicked emails from my clients, documenting the exact financial damage my mother's lies were causing my business. I created a secure, encrypted folder labeled defamation suit. Every lie my mother told on camera was a nail in her legal coffin. She was openly accusing me of elder abuse fraud and severe psychiatric illness without a shred of medical proof. She was trying to win a public relations war, oblivious to the fact that she was handing my corporate attorney everything he needed to destroy her in civil court. I worked for 4 straight hours, archiving the digital footprint of their entire smear campaign until my eyes burned. Just as I finished backing up the final file to an external hard drive, a heavy, aggressive knock pounded against my front door. It was nearly 11 at night. The storm had worsened, the wind howling against the siding of my house. I stiffened my heart, jumping into my throat. I walked quietly to the entryway and checked the security monitor. It was not Gavin. It was not my parents. It was a man I had never seen before, wearing a damp raincoat and holding a thick manila envelope. I engaged the heavy security chain and opened the door just a few inches. The man did not smile. He asked if I was Gemma. When I confirmed my identity, he shoved the thick envelope through the narrow gap in the door. He stated that I had been officially served, turned on his heel, and walked quickly back to his idling car. I closed the door, locked the deadbolt, and ripped open the envelope. I pulled out a stack of legal documents bearing the official seal of the county family court. I read the bold, black text on the first page, and the air left my lungs. Brenda and Harrison had filed a formal legal petition for a conservatorship. They were asking a judge to grant them full, absolute medical and financial guardianship over me. They had filed sworn affidavits claiming I was a danger to myself and incapable of managing my own affairs. They were utilizing the legal system to strip me of my basic human rights, seize my business, and erase my freedom entirely to steal $4,600,000. The morning sun glared through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls of my attorney's downtown Chicago war room. I sat across the polished mahogany table from Jonathan, my high-powered corporate litigator. The massive stack of legal documents I had received the night before was spread out between us. The air in the room was completely still heavy with the terrifying reality of what my parents were attempting to do. They were not just suing me for money, they were weaponizing the American legal system to erase my autonomy as a human being. Jonathan picked up a heavily stapled packet from the center of the table and slid it toward me. His expression was dead serious. He pointed a silver pen at a signature on the final page. It was a sworn medical affidavit. The name signed at the bottom belonged to Dr. Philip Carlson. I recognized that name instantly. Dr. Carlson was a prominent local psychiatrist and a longtime fixture at the exclusive country club my parents frequented. He had played golf with my father for over 2 decades. Now he was acting as their medical assassin. I read the affidavit, my jaw clenching so tight my teeth ached. Under the penalty of perjury, Dr. Carlson had written a detailed, completely fabricated psychological evaluation of me. He claimed that he had observed my behavior from a distance over the years. He officially diagnosed my 15-year estrangement from my toxic family not as a healthy boundary, but as a severe manifestation of clinical paranoia. He wrote that my refusal to engage with my parents was a clear symptom of a deteriorating mental state. He explicitly stated that I suffered from gross financial incompetence and that my sudden inheritance of $4,600,000 posed an immediate danger to my own well-being. He concluded his fraudulent report by urging the presiding judge to grant Brenda and Harrison immediate, full medical and financial conservatorship over my life to protect me from myself. Jonathan leaned back in his leather chair and folded his hands. He explained the brutal, terrifying truth about conservatorship laws in this country. He told me that a sworn affidavit from a licensed practicing psychiatrist carried immense, almost unquestionable weight in family court. If a judge looked at that document and believed Dr. Carlson, the consequences would be catastrophic and instantaneous. The court could legally freeze every single bank account I owned. They could seize total control of my landscape architecture studio, shutting down my business operations and freezing out my employees. My parents would be granted the absolute legal authority to manage my daily schedule, control my healthcare decisions, and force me into a locked psychiatric facility against my will. They would effectively own me, and by extension, they would own the blind trust my grandfather had left behind. The threat was not an empty bluff. It was a highly calculated, legally binding trap designed to bypass the mandatory audit clause in my grandfather's will. By framing themselves as my devoted caretakers rather than contesting the inheritance Brenda and Harrison, intended to drain the estate completely dry, a normal person would have been paralyzed by fear. 15 years ago, the mere thought of my parents having total control over my life would have sent me into a full-blown panic attack. But I was no longer the scared, vulnerable teenager they had thrown onto the street. I was a successful, self-made businesswoman who managed multi-million-dollar contracts and ruthless contractors on a daily basis. I looked at the fraudulent affidavit, took a calm sip of my black coffee, and looked Jonathan dead in the eye. I did not cry. I did not express fear. I told Jonathan that we were not going to play defense. We were going to obliterate their entire offensive line. I outlined my strategy with absolute freezing precision. I instructed Jonathan to immediately hire the best, most aggressive private investigator in Chicago. I wanted Dr. Carlson's life turned completely upside down and inside out. My parents were drowning in secret massive debt, which meant they absolutely did not have the liquid cash to hire a high-profile psychiatrist for a favor this risky. I knew with absolute certainty that they had either bribed Dr. Carlson with a promise of a future payout for my inheritance, or they were blackmailing him. I told Jonathan to pull Dr. Carlson's bank records, his offshore accounts, and his country club tabs. I wanted to know every single financial transaction he had made in the last 6 months. Next, I directed Jonathan to schedule an immediate, comprehensive psychological evaluation for me with 3 different, highly respected, independent, board certified psychiatrists. I would undergo every cognitive, behavioral, and competency test available in the medical field. I would secure rock solid, irrefutable medical evidence proving my absolute sanity and exceptional mental capacity. We would stack my independent evaluations directly against Dr. Carlson's fraudulent remote diagnosis to completely destroy his professional credibility in front of the judge. Finally, I handed Jonathan a thick folder containing the comprehensive financial records of my landscape architecture firm. The documents proved a decade of flawless financial management, exponential revenue growth, and perfectly balanced corporate budgets. We would use my actual, verifiable business success to physically crush their claims of financial incompetence. I told Jonathan that when we walked into that courtroom, we were not just going to defeat the conservatorship petition. We were going to file immediate counterclaims for malicious prosecution, defamation, and medical malpractice against Dr. Carlson. We would seek to have his medical license permanently revoked for filing a false affidavit. Jonathan smiled a sharp, predatory grin that told me he was more than ready for war. He gathered the documents, noting my precise instructions. He told me that my parents had drastically underestimated the woman I had become. They expected an easy, quiet surrender. Instead, they had just triggered a legal avalanche that would bury them alive. The adrenaline from humiliating my father at the construction site faded by the time I pulled into my dark driveway. I locked the deadbolts of my home, shedding my heavy steel-toed boots and high-visibility vest. The house was completely silent, insulated against the chaotic storm of greed raging outside. I walked into my private home office, a space dedicated entirely to my design work and the few precious items I truly valued. I turned on the brass desk lamp. Its warm glow illuminated a heavy, fireproof steel lockbox sitting on my drafting table. Mr. Bennett, the estate attorney, had handed this box to me privately after the disastrous will reading. He had told me it contained Winston's final personal effects, things my grandfather wanted me to have, directly bypassing the legal trust entirely. I entered the combination, the tumblers clicking heavily into place, and lifted the heavy steel lid. The scent of aged parchment graphite and Winston's signature cedarwood cologne drifted up from the box. It was a smell that instantly transported me back to my childhood, to the rare, stolen afternoons I spent hiding in his real estate office. Before Winston became a multi-million-dollar property mogul, he was a structural engineer. He loved the anatomy of buildings, the raw mathematics of holding things together against the crushing weight of gravity. Inside the box lay a stack of his original hand-drawn blueprints from the 1970s. I carefully unfolded the thick, blue-tinted paper, running my fingers over the precise, immaculate white lines. He had kept these specific drawings to remind himself of his roots, to remember the value of building something from the absolute ground up. Beneath the blueprints was a stack of thick, cream-colored envelopes, all addressed to me, in his elegant, sweeping handwriting. I opened the first envelope, my hands trembling slightly. It was dated exactly 2 months before his fatal heart failure. The letter began with terms of deep affection, but quickly shifted into a tone of chilling, pragmatic warning. Winston wrote that he knew his time was running short. More importantly, he wrote that he saw the darkness festering inside Brenda Harrison and Gavin. He described their toxic narcissism not as a simple family flaw, but as a dangerous, consuming disease. He had watched them parade around the country club, funding a hollow lifestyle on empty credit, while treating anyone beneath their tax bracket with absolute contempt. He wrote that he had watched them break my spirit when I was a teenager, and he expressed profound regret for not stepping in aggressively to stop them when they threw me out into the snow. Winston explained his final, masterful chess move. He knew that the moment he passed away, my parents would act like starved vultures. He anticipated that Brenda and Harrison would try to challenge his will by claiming he was senile demented and incapable of making his own legal decisions. To counter this, Winston detailed how he had systematically slipped away from his supervised care facility during his final weeks. He had paid entirely in cash, using untraceable off-book funds to secure 3 separate, rigorous psychological evaluations from the strictest medical professionals in Illinois. He underwent exhaustive cognitive testing to prove his absolute sanity. He legally weaponized his own medical records, sealing them directly into the trust to ensure my parents could never contest his mental competency. He had built a flawless legal shield for me from his deathbed. Tears welled in my eyes, not from sadness, but from overwhelming gratitude. Winston had fought for my protection with his dying breaths. I wiped my face and opened the final letter in the box. This one was frantic, written in a messier, hurried script just days before he died. Winston detailed a series of strange, terrifying financial maneuvers my family had attempted. He wrote that Harrison had come to him practically begging for a massive, immediate injection of liquid cash. He noted that Gavin had been frantically trying to access the original deeds to several commercial properties under the guise of an investment project. Winston refused them all, citing their extreme financial incompetence, but the sheer desperation in their behavior had alarmed him deeply. I sat back in my leather office chair, my mind racing, as I pieced the clues together. I looked at the towering stack of conservatorship documents my parents had served me the night before. I thought about the forged medical affidavit from Dr. Carlson. A cold, piercing realization struck me with the force of a freight train. My parents were taking an unbelievable, catastrophic legal risk by bribing a psychiatrist and filing an emergency guardianship petition. The legal penalties for conservatorship fraud were massive. They would only risk federal prison if the alternative was somehow worse. They were not playing a long game to simply absorb my wealth over time. They were rushing the courts. They were moving with reckless, sloppy speed because they were completely out of time. The pieces formed a terrifying picture of my family's true reality. They did not just want my money to buy luxury cars and vacation homes. They desperately needed my inheritance money to plug a massive, catastrophic hole in their own finances. They were hiding a ticking time bomb. Gavin's extortion attempt at my studio, my father's frantic public performance, the bribed psychiatrist, it was all fueled by blinding panic. They were drowning in a deep, dark ocean of debt, and my inheritance was the only life raft in sight. I stared at Winston's blueprints, internalizing his structural wisdom. To entirely destroy a corrupt building, you do not just hit the walls. You find the rotten foundation, and you strike the load-bearing pillars. I finally knew exactly how to crush them forever. I sat in the quiet solitude of my office, plotting out every single detail of my counterattack. The storm outside finally began to subside, matching the crystal-clear focus taking over my mind. The sharp, piercing chime of my perimeter security system shattered the absolute silence of my home. It was nearly 2 a.m. The violent storm that had battered Chicago all evening had finally reduced to a steady, freezing drizzle. I stiffened in my leather office chair, my eyes instantly darting away from my grandfather's blueprints and toward the glowing security monitors mounted on my wall. I tapped the screen to pull up the front porch camera feed. A solitary figure stood under the pale yellow glow of the motion sensor light. It was Naomi. My sister-in-law stood completely still, shivering slightly in the damp night air. She wore the same charcoal gray designer suit from the police precinct, though the fabric was now wrinkled and soaked from the cold rain. She gripped a thick, heavy leather briefcase in one hand and held her posture with a rigid, terrifying intensity. She did not look like a woman dropping by for a late-night family chat. She looked like a soldier stepping onto a battlefield. I walked quietly down the hallway, my mind running through every possible trap my parents could have set. Could she be wearing a wire? Could Harrison be waiting in a car down the street? I reached the heavy oak door and unlocked the deadbolt with a loud metallic click. I kept the steel security chain firmly engaged and opened the door just a few inches. The freezing wind whipped through the narrow gap, biting at my face. Naomi did not attempt to push her way inside. She looked me directly in the eye, her expression stripped of all corporate pretense. She told me she was alone. She stated that she had left her children safely with her sister across state lines, and that she had driven straight here because we needed to talk immediately. Her voice was raspy, devoid of any warmth, carrying the heavy weight of absolute betrayal. I searched her dark eyes for any sign of deception. I saw nothing but raw, burning fury. I unlatched the chain and pulled the door open. Naomi stepped into the foyer. She did not bother to take off her wet coat or offer a single polite greeting. She walked with relentless purpose straight past me, her expensive heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She headed directly for the kitchen, navigating my home as if she owned it. I closed the door, engaged every lock, and followed her closely. When I reached the kitchen, Naomi was already standing at the large marble island. She hoisted the heavy leather briefcase onto the pristine surface. It hit the marble with a dull, heavy thud that echoed through the quiet house. She kept her hands resting flat on top of the leather, her knuckles white from the pressure. She stared down at the briefcase for a long, heavy moment before finally looking up at me. She stated that she was completely done playing the supportive, oblivious wife. She told me she had spent the entire afternoon quietly ripping through Gavin's private banking records, utilizing every single forensic accounting skill she possessed as an elite corporate consultant. She had expected to find mounting credit card debt, or perhaps another pathetic failed startup venture. What she found instead had shattered her entire marriage into a million irreparable pieces. Naomi's voice dropped to a lethal, trembling whisper. She revealed that Gavin had secretly drained their children's educational trust funds. He had liquidated hundreds of thousands of dollars that Naomi had meticulously saved for their future. He did not just take a small loan. He completely emptied the accounts, wiping out years of her hard work. When Naomi traced the wire transfers, she discovered exactly where the stolen money had gone. Gavin had sent every single penny to Dr. Carlson and the corrupt conservatorship lawyers. He had stolen from his own children to finance the fraudulent legal attack designed to lock me in a psychiatric facility. The sheer depravity of his actions hung in the cold air of the kitchen. My brother had sold out the future of his own flesh and blood simply to fund a desperate, illegal power grab. He had crossed a line of moral bankruptcy that even I had not anticipated. I stood across the marble island, feeling a sickening surge of disgust. Gavin was willing to destroy his own children's lives just to steal my inheritance. Naomi looked at me, a single tear cutting through her flawless, rain-streaked makeup. She quickly wiped it away, replacing her brief moment of sorrow with a mask of pure, concentrated vengeance. She told me she had spent her entire marriage believing my parents' carefully crafted lies about me. She had believed I was the unstable, dangerous runaway who broke her parents' hearts. She had believed Gavin was a victim of my supposed cruelty. But after seeing the financial records, after witnessing Gavin's pathetic display at the police station, the illusion had completely disintegrated. She realized that my parents were a black hole of narcissism, and Gavin was their eager, spineless accomplice. She unclasped the brass latches of the leather briefcase. The locks snapped open loudly. She reached inside and pulled out a small metallic flash drive. She held it up between her fingers, the metal catching the dim light of the kitchen pendant lamps. She told me that she was filing for full, immediate custody of her children and an aggressive divorce by the end of the week to face absolute financial and legal ruin. And she knew I wanted the exact same thing for my parents. Naomi walked around the marble island, closing the distance between us. She gestured toward my home office down the hall. She told me that the flash drive contained every single piece of encrypted financial data she had managed to download from Gavin's hidden servers before she fled their home. It held the brutal, unfiltered truth about my family's hidden financial decay. She marched past me, heading straight for my office. I followed her inside, watching as she approached my drafting table. She moved my grandfather's blueprints aside with respectful care. She picked up my laptop, opened the screen, and firmly inserted the flash drive into the side port. The computer chimed as the device connected. Naomi leaned over the keyboard, her eyes reflecting the glowing screen. She turned her head, looking at me with a deadly, calculating smile. "You want to know why they are trying to lock you in a psych ward? Look at this." I stepped up to the monitor, staring intently at the glowing screen. Naomi navigated through a labyrinth of encrypted folders with blinding speed. Her manicured fingers danced across my keyboard effortlessly, executing commands that bypassed the basic security firewalls Gavin had haphazardly set up on his home network. She opened a master spreadsheet. The screen instantly filled with rows upon rows of complex data, all highlighted in aggressive, glaring red. These were not simple bank statements. These were massive, convoluted financial ledgers, expertly parsed and decoded by a woman who spent her entire career dismantling billion-dollar corporate mergers. Naomi pointed a steady finger at the top left corner of the screen. She stated that my parents had been running a high-stakes, fraudulent shell game for the past decade. Brenda and Harrison did not possess a single dime of actual liquid wealth. Their entire country club lifestyle, the flashy designer clothes, the leased luxury cars, the extravagant charity donations they used to buy social status, it was all a complete fabrication. Their entire existence was completely funded by fraudulent, overlapping lines of credit. But the credit card debt was merely the superficial surface layer of their deception. Naomi minimized the spreadsheet and opened a scanned, heavily redacted document bearing the official, terrifying seal of the United States Treasury. My parents were currently harboring a massive, undeclared tax debt. They had been actively dodging the Internal Revenue Service for years, moving money through dummy corporate accounts and hiding behind highly illegal accounting practices to avoid paying their fair share. Naomi explained that the IRS had finally caught up to their pathetic scheme. The federal government was preparing to issue a massive tax lien against every single asset they owned. The total debt, including years of compounding interest and severe federal penalties, exceeded $2 million. If Brenda and Harrison did not pay the Treasury within exactly 30 days, they were not just going to lose their heavily mortgaged suburban mansion, they were going to be federally indicted for tax evasion. The penalty was a mandatory lengthy sentence in federal prison. I felt the air rush out of my lungs as the reality of their situation washed over me. My parents were cornered animals. Their desperate, rapid push for a conservatorship was not just about maintaining their toxic control over me. It was literally their final desperate bid for physical freedom. They needed my $4,600,000 inheritance to pay off the federal government and save themselves from incarceration. But Naomi was not finished. She closed the IRS documents and opened a separate, heavily encrypted folder labeled with Gavin's initials. Her jaw tightened, a muscle feathering in her cheek as she prepared to deliver the final, most devastating blow. She told me that while my parents were busy committing federal tax fraud, my golden child brother had decided to secure his own spectacular financial ruin. Naomi pulled up a high-resolution scan of a commercial real estate deed. I recognized the property immediately. It was one of the prime, highly lucrative downtown lots my grandfather Winston had owned for 30 years. I looked closely at the bottom of the page. Winston's signature was there, authorizing a massive high-interest equity loan against the property. But the ink looked entirely wrong. The pressure of the pen strokes lacked my grandfather's typical fluid grace. It was rigid and forced. Naomi confirmed my immediate sickening suspicion. She stated that exactly 2 years ago, Gavin had blatantly forged Grandfather Winston's signature. He had illegally leveraged the property to secure an instant, massive cash loan. Gavin bypassed the bank's usual strict verification procedures by utilizing a corrupt loan officer he frequently partied with. He took the stolen money and dumped every single penny of it into a highly volatile, completely unregulated cryptocurrency trading platform. He genuinely thought he was a financial genius. He thought he could double the stolen money overnight, pay back the equity loan before Winston ever noticed the fraudulent lien on the property, and quietly pocket the massive profit. Instead, the crypto market crashed catastrophically. The trading platform liquidated his assets entirely. Gavin lost the entire loan amount in less than 48 hours. He wiped out millions of dollars of my grandfather's hard-earned equity with a few reckless clicks on his smartphone. Naomi's voice was sharp as shattered glass as she explained the horrific fallout. When the bank demanded their first massive repayment, Gavin panicked. He confessed everything to our parents. Instead of turning their criminal son over to the authorities, Brenda and Harrison chose to cover up his felony. They frantically shuffled their own dwindling credit lines to make the minimum monthly payments on the fraudulent loan, ensuring Winston never saw a default notice in the mail. They actively protected a felon while letting their own financial ship sink into oblivion. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding with a mixture of absolute disgust and profound clarity. The entire picture was now terrifyingly clear. The forged loan was coming due in full. The bank was actively preparing to audit the original deed. The IRS was 30 days away from seizing everything my parents owned. The family was facing a total, inescapable, catastrophic collapse. Naomi turned to face me, the blue light from the computer screen illuminating the fierce, unyielding determination in her dark eyes. She told me that if they did not get their hands on my blind trust in the next 30 days, the bank would discover Gavin's forgery. The IRS would indict Brenda and Harrison. The entire family would be subjected to a relentless federal investigation, and all 3 of them would be sentenced to federal prison. They needed me locked away in a psychiatric ward so they could legally plunder my grandfather's estate, pay off the IRS, quietly settle the forged equity loan, and pretend none of this ever happened. I was their designated sacrificial lamb. They were perfectly willing to steal my basic human rights, destroy my landscape architecture studio, and drug me in a locked facility, all to avoid wearing orange jumpsuits. I looked away from the glowing computer screen and met Naomi's intense gaze. The sheer scale of their criminality was breathtaking. They were desperate, cornered felons running out of time. They had brought a psychological war to my doorstep, but Naomi had just handed me the nuclear launch codes. I stood up, feeling cold certainty solidify in my chest. We had exactly 30 days before their world imploded. Section 12. 1,000 words. I looked across the kitchen island at Naomi. The silence between us was heavy charged with the weight of the massive criminal conspiracy we had just uncovered. For 15 years, we had been kept apart by a carefully constructed wall of lies. Now, standing in the harsh blue light of my computer monitor, that wall had completely crumbled. Naomi closed the encrypted folder and finally let out a long, exhausted sigh. She leaned against the marble counter, dropping her corporate armor for just a fraction of a second. She looked at me, her dark eyes filled with profound regret. She admitted that for her entire marriage, she had fully believed Brenda's narrative. She told me she had genuinely thought I was a troubled, dangerous runaway who had broken my parents' hearts. Brenda had spun a masterful, tragic tale of a rebellious teenager who refused help and chose a life of reckless isolation. Naomi had pitied them. She had sat at their lavish country club dinners, listening to them play the victims, completely oblivious to the fact that she was dining with predators. But the illusion shattered the moment she discovered Gavin's massive theft of their children's college funds. Naomi explained that seeing the sheer, unadulterated greed in their financial records had instantly opened her eyes. She realized that if they were capable of stealing from their own grandchildren to fund a fraudulent conservatorship, then everything they had ever said about me was an absolute lie. She saw them for the monsters they truly were. Naomi stood up straight, her posture snapping back into the rigid, commanding stance of a top-tier corporate consultant. She stated her terms with absolute, freezing clarity. She wanted full, uncontested custody of her children. She wanted to file for divorce immediately. She wanted to leave Gavin with absolutely nothing. Most importantly, she wanted Gavin behind bars for embezzlement and forgery, so he could never endanger their children's financial future again. I met her intense gaze and laid out my own terms. I wanted my absolute freedom. I wanted the fraudulent conservatorship petition permanently destroyed. I wanted to protect my grandfather Winston's $4,600,000 legacy from being swallowed by the IRS due to my parents' criminal negligence. I wanted Brenda and Harrison to face the maximum federal consequences for weaponizing the psychiatric system against me. We did not need to shake hands. We both understood the assignment. We were two powerful, highly intelligent women who had been grossly underestimated by a family of narcissistic parasites. The alliance was officially forged. We spent the entire night turning my home office into a tactical command center. I brewed a massive pot of strong black coffee while Naomi connected her encrypted laptop to my secure network. We worked side by side, operating with ruthless synchronized efficiency. Naomi possessed an elite forensic understanding of corporate shell games, while I brought meticulous discipline. My skills were honed from years of managing complex architectural budgets. We started by aggressively cross-referencing Gavin's bank statements against the forged commercial real estate deed. Naomi traced the exact digital path of the stolen money. We documented the precise moment the funds left the corrupt bank officer's desk, flowed into Gavin's hidden crypto trading accounts, and vanished in the market crash. We compiled a rock-solid timeline proving Brenda and Harrison had actively covered up the felony, shifting their own credit lines to hide the fraud from Winston. Then we turned our attention to the doctor. We focused on the most dangerous piece on the board, Dr. Philip Carlson. I pulled up the fraudulent medical affidavit he had submitted to the family court. Naomi ran a brutal deep-dive background check on his personal finances. She cross-referenced his country club dues, his mortgage payments, and his private clinic's revenue streams. It took her less than 2 hours to find the smoking gun. Naomi uncovered a series of highly suspicious automated wire transfers routing through a shell corporation registered in the Cayman Islands. She matched the dates directly to the conservatorship filings. They were paying Dr. Carlson a massive illegal bribe to sign the fake psychiatric evaluation. The doctor was drowning in a silent malpractice lawsuit from a former patient, and he desperately needed untraceable offshore cash to settle it out of court. Brenda had promised him a massive cut of my inheritance the moment the judge granted them legal control over my life. We printed every single piece of evidence: bank statements, wire transfer receipts, the forged deed, the IRS tax liens, and the corrupt doctor's offshore account numbers. We organized the documents into pristine, meticulously labeled binders. We were building a bulletproof, inescapable legal snare. As the sun began to rise over the Chicago suburbs, casting a pale morning light through my office windows, we reviewed our final strategy. We knew that simply handing this evidence over to the police in a quiet room was not enough. My parents were masters of social manipulation. If they were arrested quietly, they would spin a narrative of victimhood, claiming I had framed them. They would use their high society connections to post bail and drag me through years of agonizing civil litigation. We needed to destroy them, publicly. We needed to execute a maneuver so devastating and so visible that they would lose their social standing, their financial leverage, and their freedom all in the exact same second. We needed a stage. Naomi took a sip of her cold coffee and smiled a sharp, predatory smile. She pulled a heavy, gold-embossed envelope from her briefcase and slid it across my drafting table. It was an invitation to Brenda and Harrison's upcoming 35th wedding anniversary gala. The event was scheduled to take place in exactly 2 weeks at an ultra-exclusive downtown hotel. It was the very same luxury hotel where my grandfather Winston had previously owned a massive share of corporate stock. Brenda and Harrison were completely unaware that the hotel's general manager still possessed a deep, unwavering loyalty to Winston's legacy. This gave us an incredible, unseen operational advantage. Naomi explained that my parents were planning to use the anniversary gala as a massive public relations stunt. They intended to invite hundreds of elite business partners, politicians, and socialites. They wanted to use the event to project an image of absolute financial stability and perfect family harmony. We realized simultaneously that this gala was the perfect, ultimate trap. We had our evidence. We had our timeline. Now we had our stage. We just needed to set the bait. The sun was fully up by the time Naomi and I finalized our tactical plan. We sat at my kitchen island surrounded by the meticulously organized binders of financial ruin we had compiled overnight. Naomi looked at her designer watch, confirming it was just past 9 in the morning. This was the exact time my mother usually enjoyed her morning coffee on the veranda of her heavily mortgaged suburban mansion. It was time to cast the bait. I needed to deliver the performance of a lifetime. If Brenda sensed even a fraction of a percent of confidence in my voice, her paranoid instincts would flare and she would lock down completely. I had to convince a master manipulator that she had successfully broken my mind. I took a slow, deep breath, intentionally altering my posture. I slumped my shoulders, closed my eyes, and forced myself to remember the absolute terror I felt as an 18-year-old girl freezing on the Chicago streets. I channeled that raw, visceral panic into my chest until my breathing became shallow and erratic. I picked up my smartphone. I dialed my mother's cell phone number for the first time in 15 years. The dial tone echoed loudly in the quiet kitchen. Naomi watched me with a silent, intense nod of encouragement. After 4 long rings, the line connected. "Hello?" My mother's voice was sharp and guarded. She clearly recognized my caller ID and was immediately suspicious. I did not say hello back. Instead, I let out a ragged, trembling gasp. I forced real tears into my eyes, letting the salt water spill down my cheeks to make my vocal cords constrict naturally. I pushed a pathetic, broken sob into the receiver. "Mom," I whispered, making sure my voice cracked heavily on the word. "Please, I cannot do this anymore." The line was completely silent for 3 seconds. Then I heard the subtle shift in her breathing. Her predatory instincts had just been activated. "Gemma," my mother replied, her tone instantly shifting from guarded to a sickeningly sweet, artificial concern. "Are you all right, honey? You sound completely unstable." I leaned heavily into the performance, letting my voice pitch higher with manufactured desperation. I told her that the legal pressure was destroying me. I claimed that I had not slept in days, that my landscape architecture clients were abandoning my studio because of her online videos, and that the sheer terror of being locked in a psychiatric facility was making me physically ill. I sobbed loudly into the phone, begging her to stop the legal proceedings. I told her she had won. I told her that she had successfully broken me down. My mother let out a soft, highly calculated sigh of pure satisfaction. She told me that this was simply tough love, entirely necessary to bring a wayward daughter back to reality. She claimed that she and my father only filed the conservatorship because they were desperately worried about my declining mental competence. I knew I had her hooked. It was time to reel her in. I took another shaky breath and offered the ultimate compromise. I told her that if she and Dad immediately withdrew the conservatorship petition and destroyed Dr. Carlson's medical affidavit, I would willingly surrender. I promised to sign over exactly 50% of Grandfather Winston's entire estate directly to Gavin. I explicitly stated that I would initiate a voluntary wire transfer of $2,300,000 to Gavin's personal bank account to cover all of his supposed business debts. The bait was absolutely irresistible. 50% was more than enough cash to secretly pay off their massive IRS tax liens and cover Gavin's forged commercial property loan without triggering a federal investigation. By offering the money voluntarily, I was giving them a perfect legal loophole to bypass the mandatory audit clause in my grandfather's trust. I heard my mother cover the receiver with her hand. She was likely whispering frantically to my father about the massive amount of money I had just offered. When my mother returned to the line, her voice was dripping with absolute arrogance. She had swallowed the bait completely, but her toxic narcissism demanded a final humiliating victory lap. She told me that a private legal settlement was simply not enough. She stated that my shameful, erratic behavior had severely damaged the family's pristine reputation within their elite social circle. If I truly wanted them to drop the psychiatric hold, I had to prove my rehabilitation to the world. She demanded that I attend their upcoming 35th wedding anniversary gala at the downtown luxury hotel. She insisted that I walk up onto the main stage, stand in front of hundreds of their high society guests, and physically sign the financial transfer documents under the bright spotlight. She wanted a public surrender to validate her narrative of being a forgiving, heroic mother saving her disturbed daughter. I forced one final, pathetic whimper into the phone. I told her I would do whatever she wanted as long as the lawyers left me alone. I promised to be there and sign the papers. My mother praised me like a compliant dog and abruptly ended the call. I lowered the phone from my ear and placed it flat on the marble counter. The manufactured tears on my cheeks instantly dried up. My trembling hands became perfectly steady, locking into a posture of absolute, unwavering control. I looked across the kitchen island at Naomi, and a cold, icy smile spread across my face. They had fallen for every single calculated word. The trap was officially set. We had exactly 14 days to prepare for the gala. 14 days to coordinate with my elite corporate attorney, assemble our ironclad digital forensics, and ensure the federal authorities were properly notified. My parents thought they were about to secure a massive life-saving fortune on a silver platter. They had no idea they had just invited their own absolute destruction to dinner. The 14 days leading up to the gala evaporated in a blur of calculated preparation. When the morning arrived, I woke up before dawn. My mind was completely clear, functioning with the cold precision of a military tactician. I sat at my kitchen island with a single cup of black coffee, watching the digital clock on my phone flip to exactly 6 in the morning. My phone buzzed immediately. It was a secure message from Naomi. The text was brief and strictly operational. She confirmed her children were safely across state lines at her sister's house in Indiana. They were insulated from the catastrophic fallout about to hit Chicago. Naomi added her divorce attorney was standing by, ready to file the emergency asset freeze the second our trap was sprung. I typed back a simple confirmation. We were operating like a highly trained strike team, moving in perfect synchronization to dismantle the toxic empire that controlled our lives for far too long. I walked into my bedroom and opened my closet. Today was not a day for blending into the background. For 15 years, my family forced me into the role of the invisible scapegoat. They dressed me in hand-me-downs, mocked my physical appearance, and relentlessly tore down my self-esteem to ensure I remained compliant. When they threw me out into the freezing snow at 18, they expected me to disappear. They expected me to remain the pathetic, broken victim of their narcissistic narrative. I reached into the closet and pulled out the outfit I had meticulously selected for this exact occasion. It was a stunning, razor-sharp, emerald green designer suit. The fabric was heavy and immaculate, tailored to fit my frame with absolute, unapologetic authority. The deep green color symbolized wealth growth and the thriving business I had built from nothing with my own bare hands. I stood in front of the full-length mirror and slowly buttoned the blazer. I did not recognize the frightened teenager who used to flinch at my father's raised voice. The woman staring back at me radiated absolute, undeniable power. I clipped on minimalist gold earrings and slipped into black stiletto heels that struck the hardwood floor like a judge's gavel. I pulled my hair back into a sleek professional style that mirrored Naomi's commanding corporate look. I applied a deep crimson lipstick, completing a mask of total confidence. Every piece of this wardrobe was a deliberate psychological weapon. I was not going to their gala as a broken daughter begging for forgiveness. I was arriving as a highly successful CEO preparing to liquidate a bankrupt enterprise. I took one final look in the mirror, permanently shedding the scapegoat identity. I picked up my leather briefcase containing the digital payload that would seal their fate and walked out. The downtown luxury hotel was an architectural masterpiece of marble and glass. Pulling up to the valet stand, the venue's sheer irony made me smile. This was the exact hotel where my grandfather Winston had previously held a massive share of corporate stock. Brenda and Harrison had chosen this location to flaunt their imaginary wealth, completely unaware that the ground they were standing on practically belonged to the man they were trying to defraud. I handed my keys to the valet and stepped through the revolving doors. The lobby was a symphony of wealth, filled with crystal chandeliers, towering floral arrangements, and the soft hum of classical music. I checked my watch. I was exactly 2 hours early for the main reception. This was by design. I needed to secure the perimeter before my family arrived. I bypassed the main ballroom and navigated the service corridors until I found the audiovisual control room. The heavy soundproof door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside the dark, monitor-filled booth. A young technician wearing a black polo shirt spun around in his swivel chair. I did not care about his name today. I only cared about execution. Naomi had met with him the previous evening, handing him a thick envelope filled with enough cash to guarantee his absolute, unquestioning loyalty for the night. I walked up to the main control console and placed my leather briefcase on the desk. I unlatched the brass locks and pulled out the flash drive containing the forensic financial evidence Naomi and I compiled. I handed the drive to the technician. He did not ask any questions. He plugged it directly into the master server that controlled the massive projector screens in the main ballroom. I stood behind him, watching his hands fly across the keyboard as he opened the secure files. I ordered him to run a full diagnostic test of the payload. The monitors in the booth flickered, displaying high-definition scans of Gavin's forged commercial real estate deeds, the corrupt psychiatrist's offshore wire transfers, and the devastating IRS tax liens against my parents. The documents were crystal clear, the damning financial figures highlighted in bright, aggressive red. I instructed the technician to lock the files into a hotkey sequence. When I gave him the verbal signal from the stage, he was to cut the family's slideshow entirely and project these documents onto every single screen in the room at maximum brightness. The technician nodded, locking the sequence into the mainframe. The digital guillotine was officially armed, loaded, and waiting for my command. The long hallway leading to the grand ballroom felt like the final stretch of a marathon. I could hear the faint, elegant sound of a string quartet warming up behind the closed mahogany doors. Caterers rushed past me carrying trays of expensive champagne flutes and silver platters of caviar. None of them knew this extravagant celebration was funded by criminal fraud. In a few short hours, this room would become an active crime scene. I adjusted the lapels of my emerald suit one last time, prepared to face my family and execute the absolute destruction of their fake empire. I pushed open the heavy mahogany doors and stepped into the grand ballroom. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over hundreds of Chicago's most elite citizens. Politicians, real estate developers, and high society socialites milled about, completely oblivious to the fact that they were attending a celebration funded by criminal desperation. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided effortlessly through the crowd, balancing silver trays loaded with champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. The string quartet played a lively classical piece, providing a sophisticated soundtrack to my family's impending downfall. I paused near the entrance, allowing my eyes to adjust to the bright lights and scanning the room for my targets. It did not take long to find them. Brenda and Harrison were holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by a tight circle of wealthy investors. My mother wore an ostentatious silver gown that practically screamed for attention. She was absolutely dripping in diamonds. A massive necklace sparkled against her collarbone, matching the heavy bracelets weighing down her wrists. I knew with absolute certainty that every single piece of that jewelry was rented. They could not afford a genuine diamond if their lives depended on it. My father stood beside her, laughing loudly at a joke someone had just made. He held a glass of scotch in one hand, projecting the image of a carefree, successful patriarch. He wore a custom-tailored tuxedo that I was sure he had purchased using the very credit lines that were about to collapse. I took a deep breath, plastered a warm, apologetic smile on my face, and walked directly toward them. My mother spotted me first. Her eyes widened for a fraction of a second as she took in my emerald green designer suit. She had expected me to arrive looking defeated and subdued. Instead, I looked like a woman who owned the entire building. But Brenda was a master manipulator, and she recovered her composure instantly. She set her champagne glass on a passing waiter's tray and threw her arms open wide, rushing toward me with manufactured joy. "Gemma, my darling girl!" she exclaimed loudly, ensuring everyone in a 10-foot radius could hear her. "You made it!" She pulled me into a suffocating, perfume-soaked embrace. She squeezed me tightly, but her whisper in my ear was cold and threatening. "Play your part perfectly, or I will have Dr. Carlson sign the commitment papers tonight." I pulled back from the hug, maintaining my flawless, compliant smile. I told her that I was just so grateful to be welcomed back into the family. I played the role of the broken, rehabilitated prodigal daughter with absolute perfection. Harrison stepped forward and placed a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. He turned to the group of wealthy investors and introduced me. He told them that I had gone through a difficult, rebellious phase, but that family love conquers all obstacles. He proudly announced that I was finally ready to rejoin the family business and take my rightful place under their guidance. I shook hands with mayors, hedge fund managers, and socialites. I smiled politely, thanking them for their kind words, all while knowing that within the hour these same people would watch my father be escorted out in handcuffs. As my parents paraded me around the room like a prized trophy, I caught sight of Gavin, standing near the ice sculpture. He was not mingling. He was gripping a glass of bourbon, glaring at me with raw, unfiltered hatred. He wore a velvet dinner jacket, looking every bit the spoiled, entitled golden child. He hated that I was getting attention, even if it was fake attention orchestrated by our parents. He hated that I was standing there in a power suit instead of cowering in a corner. He was completely unaware that his entire financial existence was about to be vaporized. I offered him a brief, polite nod. He scoffed and looked away, taking an angry gulp of his drink. He had no idea that his wife had already handed me the weapon to destroy him. I scanned the room again and finally locked eyes with Naomi. She was standing near the exit doors, strategically positioned away from Gavin. She wore a stunning black evening gown, holding a glass of sparkling water. She looked calm, collected, and dangerously sharp. We did not exchange words or move toward each other. We simply held eye contact for 2 seconds. It was a silent confirmation. The trap was secure. The divorce papers were ready. The authorities were notified. Everything was moving exactly according to our meticulous plan. The tension in my chest tightened with every passing minute. The clock was ticking closer to the main event. Waiters began chiming small bells, signaling the guests to take their seats at the lavishly decorated dinner tables. The ambient noise of the crowd shifted as hundreds of people moved toward the front of the ballroom. I found my assigned seat at the head table, positioned directly next to my mother, symbolizing my supposed submission. I sat down, placing my leather clutch neatly on my lap. The stage in front of us was brightly lit, featuring a podium and a massive projector screen currently displaying a loop of fake Happy Family photographs. My heart beat a steady, powerful rhythm against my ribs. I watched my father adjust his tie and walk confidently toward the stage stairs. He was preparing to deliver the speech that would seal their fate. The air in the room felt electric, heavy with the suffocating weight of their impending doom. I took a slow sip of ice water, my eyes fixed on the podium ready to strike. I knew this exact moment would forever redefine my entire life. The fearful, invisible girl they threw away was dead, replaced by a truly unstoppable force. I was no longer their victim. I was the architect of their absolute destruction. The sharp feedback of a microphone tapping echoed across the grand ballroom, instantly silencing the dull roar of high society chatter. Harrison stood dead center on the brightly illuminated stage. He adjusted his tailored tuxedo jacket and offered the crowd a practiced smile. Behind him, the massive projector screen displayed a carefully curated slideshow of our supposed family history. There were photos of Gavin holding various sports trophies, Brenda posing in exotic vacation spots, and heavily edited group shots that artificially inserted me into a narrative of domestic bliss. It was a masterclass in deception. Harrison cleared his throat, leaning casually into the mahogany podium. He welcomed the mayors, the hedge fund managers, and the socialites, thanking them profusely for gathering to celebrate 35 years of his marriage to Brenda. He spoke smoothly about building a legacy, about the hard work required to maintain a pristine reputation in Chicago, and about the deep, unwavering strength of family values. The audience hung on his every word, completely captivated by the illusion of his success. I sat at the head table, my face an impenetrable mask of polite attention. My mother reached over and squeezed my forearm, her sharp acrylic nails digging painfully into my skin through the thick fabric of my emerald green suit. It was a physical warning to behave. I did not flinch. I just kept my eyes locked entirely on my father. Harrison dramatically lowered his voice, shifting his tone from celebratory to somber. He gripped the edges of the podium, bowing his head slightly to project the striking image of a weary, heartbroken patriarch. He told the silent room that building a family was not always a perfect journey. He sighed heavily into the microphone, stating that sometimes parents are burdened with the agonizing task of unconditionally loving a truly difficult child. He did not use my name immediately, but the heavy implication hung thick and poisonous in the air. He wove a sickeningly narcissistic tale about the brutal trials of raising a daughter who had lost her way. He painted a dark picture of a troubled young woman who had completely rejected her family's love, chosen a life of dangerous isolation, and caused her parents endless nights of worry. He was standing in front of hundreds of people, openly characterizing my 15 years of independent survival and massive business success as a tragic psychiatric breakdown. He framed their recent vicious legal attack, the fraudulent conservatorship petition meant to legally strip me of my human rights, as an act of profound parental mercy. He claimed that he and Brenda had simply utilized tough love to rescue their sick daughter from the very brink of total self-destruction. The crowd murmured in sympathetic agreement. Women wiped away imaginary tears with silk napkins. Powerful men nodded in solemn respect for a father willing to bear such a heavy emotional cross. It was the most revolting display of public manipulation I had ever witnessed in my entire life. Then Harrison abruptly shifted his demeanor back to overwhelming joy. He looked up, his eyes shining with fake emotion, and announced that tonight was not just a mere anniversary celebration. It was a glorious homecoming. He pointed directly at me, declaring to the ballroom that his prodigal daughter had finally seen the light. He claimed that I had recognized the error of my ways, accepted their loving guidance, and agreed to surrender my rebellious independence to permanently rejoin the safety of the family fold. The audience erupted into polite, encouraging applause. I felt my mother's tight grip on my arm loosen as she basked in the collective approval of her elite peers. Harrison reached inside the breast pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket. He pulled out a thick, folded legal document and a heavy gold fountain pen. He held the paperwork high in the air for the flashing cameras of the local society photographers to capture. He proudly announced that to signify this beautiful moment of family healing, I had voluntarily agreed to sign over a portion of my recently inherited estate to my beloved older brother Gavin. He spun the narrative brilliantly, framing my supposed surrender of $2,300,000 not as a desperate extortion payment to save them from federal prison, but as a generous, highly symbolic gesture of sibling unity. Gavin stood up from his table near the front, arrogantly adjusting his velvet dinner jacket and flashing a smug, victorious grin to the loudly applauding crowd. He looked at me with absolute arrogance, fully believing he had won the war. He fully believed he was mere seconds away from securing the exact amount of cash he desperately needed to bury his commercial real estate forgery forever. Harrison stepped out from behind the mahogany podium, extending his hand warmly toward my table. He spoke directly into the microphone, his voice booming across the massive grand ballroom. He invited me to come up to the stage to sign the legal settlement document in front of their esteemed guests, and to officially welcome me back into the family. The loud applause swelled, urging me forward. I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my emerald green designer suit, projecting absolute, unwavering calm. I did not look at my mother. I did not look at Gavin. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Harrison. The walk from my table to the stage stairs felt like moving through deep water. Every single step was deliberate, measured, and completely devoid of any fear. I climbed the short flight of carpeted stairs and stepped into the bright, blinding glare of the main stage spotlights. The heat of the theatrical lights washed over my face, but my blood ran ice cold. Harrison met me perfectly in the center of the stage. He held out the legal settlement document in one hand and the expensive gold fountain pen in the other. His eyes were wide with a manic, heavily suppressed, desperate energy. He was so incredibly close to getting away with absolute criminal fraud. He leaned in, his fake television smile never wavering, and whispered viciously under his breath for me to sign the damn paper quickly before I ruined everything. I reached out my right hand. I did not take the gold pen. I did not take the fraudulent settlement contract. Instead, I smoothly and forcefully wrapped my fingers directly around the microphone he was holding tightly in his hand. I pulled the microphone directly out of his iron grip. Harrison blinked repeatedly, a brief flash of genuine confusion finally breaking through his carefully manufactured facade. He tried to hold on to the electronic device, but my physical grip was like cold iron. I stepped right past him, leaving him standing there looking completely foolish with a useless piece of paper, and positioned myself dead center in front of the silent, expectant crowd. Section 17. 1,000 Words. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute. Hundreds of eyes stared up at me waiting for a tearful apology or a display of profound gratitude. Harrison reached out desperately, trying to herd me back toward his carefully constructed script. I stepped out of his reach, planted my stilettos firmly onto the polished stage, and raised the microphone. I did not sound like a frightened daughter. I spoke with the commanding, articulate voice of a chief executive officer who managed multi-million-dollar operations. I looked into the sea of wealthy investors and elites. I thanked them for gathering to witness this historic family moment. I told them that my father was absolutely correct about one thing. Tonight was indeed a night for absolute truth, transparency, and the settling of massive, long overdue debts. I raised my left hand and gave a sharp, deliberate nod toward the dark glass of the audio-visual control booth. The young technician I had secured earlier executed his final command. The sickeningly sweet slideshow of fake family photographs vanished instantly. The massive projector screens plunged into total darkness for a fraction of a second. Then, they illuminated the entire stage with blinding, high-definition white light. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The screens displayed highly classified, heavily redacted federal financial documents. I pointed to the glowing screen behind me, my voice echoing clearly. I announced that the documents currently being broadcast were official, verified tax liens issued directly by the Internal Revenue Service. I explained that Brenda and Harrison had spent the last decade running a fraudulent shell game, dodging federal taxes, and burying themselves under $2 million of inescapable debt. I emphasized that this elegant celebration was entirely funded by systemic financial fraud. I watched the realization hit the audience like a physical shockwave. The wealthy investors began whispering frantically, pulling out their smartphones. Brenda stood at the head table, her face completely drained of color. She looked like a ghost wrapped in rented silver fabric. Harrison lunged toward the podium, furiously pressing buttons in a pathetic attempt to cut the power to the screens, but the technician had locked the main console exactly as I instructed. I did not give them a single second to recover. I signaled the booth again. The massive screens instantly switched to a high-resolution scan of a commercial real estate deed. The document was magnified so every person in the room could read the fine print. I looked out into the crowd and locked eyes with Gavin. He was standing, completely frozen near the ice sculpture, his glass of bourbon slipping from his hand and shattering on the marble floor. I spoke directly to my brother, ensuring my voice reverberated through the entire hotel. I explained the document on the screen. I told the audience that exactly 2 years ago, Gavin had deliberately forged our grandfather Winston's signature to illegally leverage a multi-million-dollar downtown property. I laid out his entire scheme. I detailed how he dumped the stolen cash into a volatile cryptocurrency market and lost every penny in 48 hours. I exposed how Brenda and Harrison chose to cover up this massive felony, shifting their own dwindling credit to protect a criminal while letting their financial empire burn to the ground. Gavin's face turned a violent, sickly shade of white. The prominent real estate developers in the room stared at him with pure disgust. He had not just made a bad investment. He had committed severe, verifiable fraud. He had stolen from his own family to feed a gambling addiction, leaving his wife and children entirely vulnerable to his catastrophic failures. The golden child was finally exposed as nothing more than a desperate, lying thief hiding behind his parents' failing wealth. But I was not finished. I had saved the darkest revelation for last. I signaled the booth for the final time. The screens shifted to display a series of offshore bank wire transfers, alongside a copy of the conservatorship petition they had served me. I gripped the microphone, my voice turning to absolute ice. I revealed the horrific nature of their trap. I told the horrified crowd my parents were so desperate to pay the IRS that they resorted to psychiatric warfare. I explained that they had bribed Dr. Philip Carlson, a man sitting in this very room tonight, with untraceable offshore cash. They paid him to sign a fraudulent medical affidavit, claiming I was severely delusional and financially incompetent. I pointed at the glowing legal petition on the massive screen behind me. I told the audience that my parents had actively filed to strip me of my basic human rights. Their ultimate goal was to lock me inside a psychiatric facility against my will and seize my successful landscape architecture firm and drain my $4,600,000 inheritance to save themselves from federal prison. I laid their evil completely bare under the bright theatrical lights. The ballroom erupted into absolute chaos. Guests began shouting. Dr. Carlson, who had been sitting at a prominent table near the front, covered his face with his jacket and sprinted frantically toward the emergency exit, completely destroying his medical career in real time. Brenda collapsed into her chair, hyperventilating and clawing at her rented diamond necklace as if it were choking her. Harrison stood on the stage beside me, his mouth opening and closing silently, utterly destroyed by the sheer magnitude of the public execution I had just delivered. His pristine reputation was obliterated in less than 5 minutes. I turned to my father, my posture radiating absolute victory. I told him that I would never sign their extortion papers. I told him that my grandfather's legacy was safe, my business was thriving, and their toxic reign of terror was permanently over. I lowered the microphone, stepping away from the podium as the room descended into complete madness. I had delivered the fatal blow, and the stage was perfectly set for Naomi to strike. The elegant atmosphere of the grand anniversary gala shattered into jagged pieces. Wealthy investors shoved past each other to escape the flashing projections of federal tax liens illuminating the ballroom. Brenda scrambled up from her table, her rented silver gown catching on a chair. She shrieked at the top of her lungs, ordering someone to cut the power to the screens. Her shrill, desperate voice echoed over the frantic murmurs of fleeing socialites. She grabbed a passing waiter, demanding he find the hotel manager immediately to shut down the audio-visual system. The waiter pulled away and hurried out the side exit. Harrison remained frozen near the mahogany podium. He stared blankly out at the panicked crowd, his chest heaving as the absolute reality of his complete social and financial obliteration finally registered in his brain. Down on the main floor, the shock-paralyzing Gavin instantly mutated into blind, uncontrollable rage. His dark eyes locked onto me as I descended the carpeted stairs. He let out a loud, guttural yell, kicking his shattered glass aside and charged directly toward me. He shoved a heavy banquet table out of his way, sending crystal centerpieces crashing to the floor. His velvet dinner jacket flared open as he sprinted across the ballroom. He fully intended to physically assault me right there in front of the remaining guests. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, planting my stiletto heels firmly into the carpet. I did not flinch or raise my hands to defend myself. I knew I did not need to. I had perfectly orchestrated this sequence of events, and I knew exactly who was waiting for him. Before the venue security guards could react to Gavin's violent sprint, Naomi stepped flawlessly out from the front row of tables. She moved with lethal precision, her black evening gown sweeping across the floor as she physically intercepted her husband. She stepped directly into his path, forcing him to skid to a halt just 5 feet away from me. Gavin raised his hands, demanding she move out of his way so he could teach me a lesson about family loyalty. Naomi did not move a single inch. She looked at the man she had married. The man who secretly drained their children's college accounts to fund a corrupt psychiatric attack on my life, and smiled a cold, terrifying smile. Naomi reached into the sleek black clutch under her arm. She pulled out a thick stack of aggressively folded legal documents and slammed them directly against Gavin's chest. She spoke in a loud, commanding voice that cut through the remaining chaos. She announced that she was officially serving him with immediate divorce papers. Gavin stumbled backward, instinctively clutching the heavy documents. He stared at the bold, legal print on the top page. Before he could formulate a single excuse, Naomi delivered her second fatal strike. She informed him that a judge had granted an emergency court-ordered freeze on every single personal and business asset attached to his name. She stated clearly that his bank accounts were entirely locked, his credit cards canceled, and he was barred from accessing their home. Gavin stood completely paralyzed. The violent rage that had propelled him toward the stage instantly evaporated, replaced by absolute suffocating terror. He looked down at the divorce papers in his hands, then looked up at his wife. He opened his mouth to beg to spin another pathetic web of manipulative lies, but Naomi raised her hand and silenced him permanently. She told him that she had personally delivered his forged real estate deeds and his cryptocurrency transaction history directly to his corporate office that very morning. He was not just losing his marriage, he was losing everything. Just as Gavin froze under the crushing weight of his wife's betrayal, a loud, booming noise echoed from the back of the room. The grand double doors of the ballroom violently swung open, hitting the walls with a massive thud. The remaining wealthy guests gasped and scattered toward the side walls. A team of law enforcement officers marched into the venue in perfect formation. 2 federal agents from the Internal Revenue Service, dressed in sharp, dark suits, with badges clearly visible on their belts, led the charge. They were flanked by 4 local Chicago police officers in full uniform. The authoritative clatter of their boots instantly commanded the absolute attention of every single person left in the room. The lead federal agent confidently stepped to the center of the room, holding a thick folder of active warrants. He loudly called out the legal names of Harrison, Brenda, and Gavin, ordering them to remain exactly where they were. The ironclad clause in Grandfather Winston's blind trust had worked flawlessly. The very moment my parents had formally filed their fraudulent conservatorship petition with the county court, the trust automatically triggered the forensic accounting deployment. The elite financial firm had immediately flagged the massive irregularities in my parents' tax history and handed the findings straight to the federal authorities. But the process would normally have taken months to secure active arrest warrants. That was where our alliance changed the game. Naomi's elite corporate financial forensics had provided the missing link. By handing over the encrypted flash drive containing the exact offshore routing numbers they used to bribe the corrupt psychiatrist, alongside the undeniable proof of Gavin's real estate forgery, Naomi had drastically expedited the federal investigation. The IRS and local police had everything they needed to secure immediate warrants for tax evasion, wire fraud, and grand larceny. The federal agents marched directly toward the head table. They bypassed the stunned guests and approached my parents. Brenda let out a pathetic wail as a uniformed officer ordered her to turn around and place her hands behind her back. Harrison slumped his shoulders, offering no resistance as the cold steel handcuffs snapped shut around his wrists. Gavin dropped to his knees on the marble floor, staring blankly as an officer approached to arrest him. The sharp, metallic clink of the handcuffs securing Harrison's wrists echoed loudly through the silent ballroom. For a man who had spent his entire life obsessing over his pristine public image, the reality of this public execution was completely paralyzing. He did not utter a single word of protest. He kept his eyes locked firmly on the polished marble floor, unable to meet the horrified gazes of the mayors, hedge fund managers, and real estate tycoons he had spent decades trying to impress. Brenda, however, lacked her husband's defeated resignation. As the female police officer securely fastened the cuffs behind her back, my mother began to thrash and shriek. She wailed that she was a prominent society figure, demanding that someone call her lawyer immediately. She begged the elite guests to intervene, screaming that this was all a terrible misunderstanding, orchestrated by her deeply disturbed daughter. Not a single person stepped forward to help her. The wealthy socialites and business moguls she had courted for years physically backed away, treating her like a highly contagious disease. They shielded their faces from the flashing cameras of the local society photographers, desperate to avoid being associated with a massive federal tax evasion scandal. The absolute rejection from her beloved high society circle broke Brenda completely. Her shrill protests dissolved into pathetic, breathless sobs as the officers forcefully guided her down the steps of the grand stage. A few yards away, the local police hauled Gavin up from his knees. The velvet dinner jacket he wore was now wrinkled and soaked with the spilled bourbon from his shattered glass. The arresting officer loudly read him his Miranda rights, specifically listing the felony charges of commercial forgery, wire fraud, and grand embezzlement. Gavin looked absolutely hollow. He turned his desperate, tear-filled eyes toward Naomi, silently pleading for the unconditional support she had always provided. Naomi stood perfectly straight in her elegant black evening gown. She did not flinch. She did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. She simply looked at the father of her children, the man who had selfishly drained their educational trust funds to protect his own criminal ego, and gave him a slow, decisive nod of finality. She turned her back on him completely before the officers even began walking him toward the grand double doors. Gavin's shoulders violently slumped, the last remaining shred of his golden child entitlement vanishing into the cold reality of federal prison. The procession of law enforcement officers marched my parents and my brother down the center aisle of the ballroom. It was a humiliating, profoundly public perp walk. I remained standing near the front of the stage, my posture radiating unshakable strength in my emerald green suit. As Harrison was escorted past me, he finally lifted his head. He looked at me with an expression of profound, crushing defeat. He opened his mouth, perhaps to apologize, or perhaps to hurl one final manipulation, but the federal agent firmly directed him forward. Brenda refused to look at me at all. She kept her head buried in her chest, weeping uncontrollably as the heavy mahogany doors closed behind them. The aftermath inside the ballroom was entirely surreal. The high-definition scans of the forged deeds and federal tax liens continued to project brightly onto the massive screens behind the empty stage, providing irrefutable proof of their profound corruption. The remaining guests were simply too stunned to speak. The lively classical music had long since stopped, leaving only the awkward, tense shuffling of expensive leather shoes against the marble floor. One by one, the wealthy attendees began grabbing their coats and making swift, silent exits. They hurried out the side doors, desperate to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of the Harrison and Brenda empire. Within 15 minutes, the extravagant anniversary gala was completely deserted. I stood alone among the abandoned banquet tables, the half-empty champagne flutes, and the scattered crystal centerpieces. The lavish event they had designed to cement their elite status and publicly strip me of my human rights had become the very instrument of their absolute destruction. I heard the steady click of heels approaching from the back of the room. Naomi walked over to where I was standing. We surveyed the empty, ruined ballroom together in comfortable silence. We did not need to exchange a long, emotional conversation. We did not need to cry or hug. The profound mutual respect between us was communicated entirely through a shared look of absolute vindication. We had executed a flawless surgical strike against a family of toxic predators. Naomi had secured the safety and financial future of her children, and I had permanently protected my grandfather Winston's legacy. Naomi raised her glass of sparkling water, offering a silent, powerful toast to our total victory. I nodded in return, acknowledging the incredible strength of the alliance we had forged in the dark. Naomi turned and walked confidently out of the ballroom, ready to begin her new, independent life. I picked up my leather briefcase from the edge of the stage. The heavy, suffocating weight of my family's 15-year shadow, a burden I had carried in secret since the freezing night they threw me onto the street, was permanently gone. I walked out of the ballroom, leaving the glowing projectors and the ruined celebration behind me forever. I navigated the quiet, carpeted corridors of the luxury hotel, making my way to the front lobby. The valets and hotel staff were whispering frantically, having just witnessed my family being loaded into federal transport vehicles. I handed my ticket to the valet, maintaining my flawless professional composure. When my customized work truck pulled up to the curb, I climbed into the driver's seat and firmly gripped the steering wheel. I rolled down the window and took a deep breath of the cool, crisp night air. The brutal storm that battered Chicago had passed. I put the truck into drive and drove forward toward a brilliant, bright future. Exactly 6 months passed since that spectacular, unforgettable night in the downtown ballroom. The fallout was swift, absolute, and mercilessly public, sweeping through the high society circles of Chicago like a devastating hurricane. There was no escape for the people who had tried to destroy me. The morning after the gala, the county family court judge reviewed the staggering mountain of digital evidence Jonathan submitted. The fraudulent conservatorship petition was thrown out immediately, with extreme prejudice. The judge issued a blistering reprimand against my parents on the public record. Dr. Philip Carlson, terrified of federal prison, attempted to flip on my parents to save his own skin, but the medical board stripped him of his license anyway. Harrison and Brenda lost everything. The Internal Revenue Service seized their heavily mortgaged suburban mansion, their leased luxury cars, and every single cent hidden in their overlapping credit accounts. They were forced to move into a tiny, run-down rental unit while awaiting their federal sentencing for tax evasion and conspiracy to commit fraud. Their elite country club friends completely abandoned them. Gavin's fate was even more severe. The local prosecutors did not offer him a plea deal. He was indicted for grand embezzlement and commercial forgery. My golden child brother currently sits behind bars in a state penitentiary, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of a velvet dinner jacket. His delusions of grandeur are permanently confined to a concrete cell. Naomi executed her strategic legal exit flawlessly, demonstrating the exact corporate ruthlessness that made her so successful. The family court granted her full, uncontested custody of her children and an ironclad protective order against Gavin. She finalized her divorce and secured a massive promotion at her consulting firm, thriving in her career without the dead weight of my brother dragging her down. We still meet for coffee on occasional Sunday mornings, two highly successful women who walked through the fire and emerged entirely unscathed. Today, I stand in the center of my newly expanded, multi-acre landscape design headquarters. The crisp autumn air rustles the vibrant leaves of the imported Japanese maples lining the entrance. I used a portion of my grandfather Winston's estate to purchase this massive commercial property outright. My studio now employs over 50 talented designers, botanists, and construction specialists. We secure the most lucrative, high-profile contracts in the Midwest. The shattered glass doors of my old, small office feel like a lifetime ago. I walk past drafting tables covered in sprawling blueprints, listening to the energetic, happy chatter of my dedicated team. This business is my true sanctuary, built on a foundation of relentless hard work, pristine vision, and unshakable integrity. Every morning I walk through these doors, I feel a profound sense of absolute accomplishment. Grandfather Winston left me his $4,600,000 estate because he explicitly trusted me to build something inherently meaningful and deeply protective. I refuse to let his legacy sit stagnant in a bank account. After securing the new headquarters and ensuring my business possessed infinite runway for growth, I partnered with Jonathan's law firm to establish a specialized legal aid foundation. We created a massive, fully funded grant specifically designed to assist victims of family financial abuse. The foundation provides aggressive, top tier corporate attorneys and forensic accountants to vulnerable individuals whose own relatives are attempting to steal their assets, ruin their credit, or trap them in fraudulent conservatorships. We give them the exact same impenetrable legal shield that Winston gave me. Knowing that my grandfather's wealth is actively dismantling toxic families and saving innocent people brings me a profound, indescribable sense of peace. He saw the darkness in our family, and he handed me the ultimate weapon to fight it. Now I hand that weapon to others who desperately need it to survive. Winston's brilliant protective spirit lives on in every single person we save from financial ruin. His name will always be associated with justice and absolute strength. I step out onto the expansive, elevated wooden deck of my headquarters, looking out over the beautifully manicured growing fields stretching toward the horizon. The sunlight catches the dew on the freshly planted evergreens, a symbol of permanent resilience. The suffocating anxiety that plagued my teenage years is completely eradicated, replaced by an unyielding sense of calm. The desperate, burning need for my parents' approval died the very night they threw me out into the freezing snow 15 years ago. I learned the hard way that blood does not automatically make someone family. Blood simply indicates a biological starting point. True family consists of the people who respect your autonomy, celebrate your hard-earned success, and stand firmly beside you when the storm hits. True family is chosen, carefully, cultivated like a thriving garden. I built my own family from loyal friends, dedicated employees, and brilliant allies like Naomi. Establishing unbreakable, absolute boundaries is not an act of cruelty. It is an act of profound self-respect and necessary absolute survival. My parents tried to convince the world I was a broken, unstable failure who required permanent institutionalization. They underestimated my fire. Living a brilliant, fiercely independent, and massively successful life is the ultimate form of karma. The best revenge is simply moving forward without them. I am Gemma. I am 33 years old. I am a self-made CEO, and today I am finally entirely free. Blood does not dictate your destiny. You have the absolute power to walk away from toxic environments and build an empire of your own. Have you ever had to draw a hard line and permanently cut off toxic family members to protect your own peace and financial security? How did you enforce your boundaries when they tried to break you down? Share your own boundary setting stories in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about surviving betrayal, overcoming absolute adversity, and reclaiming your personal power. Thank you so much for watching. The gripping story of Gemma and her toxic family serves as a powerful testament to a truth many of us struggle to accept. Blood relations do not automatically equate to genuine family. For years, society has conditioned us to believe that we must unconditionally endure mistreatment from our parents or siblings simply because we share the same genetics. However, Gemma's harrowing journey shatters this dangerous illusion, teaching us that setting unbreakable boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary measure for survival. When Gemma's parents and brother attempted to strip away her basic human rights through a fraudulent conservatorship to steal her inheritance, they proved that toxic relatives often view their kin merely as resources to be exploited. Instead of crumbling under their psychological warfare or desperately seeking the approval she was denied at 18, Gemma chose a different path. She weaponized her independence. By meticulously documenting their fraud and building an alliance with Naomi, someone who also recognized the family's corruption, Gemma demonstrated that true strength lies in cold, calculated detachment. She did not owe her abusers forgiveness or her hard-earned wealth. Ultimately, the most profound lesson here is that the best revenge against narcissistic abusers is living a brilliant, autonomous life. We have the absolute right to carefully curate our inner circle, replacing obligatory toxic ties with chosen families built on mutual respect, unwavering support, and authentic love. Cutting off destructive relatives allows us to reclaim our personal narratives and channel our energy into building our own empires, just as Gemma did with her landscape architecture firm and legal aid foundation. If you are currently navigating a toxic relationship, take that crucial first step toward your own freedom today by establishing a firm boundary to protect your peace.